All right, let's get underway. It's 9:41 now. Welcome to our class. If you've not been here before, let me say a very special welcome to you. We're going through the Bible together for the third time. The first two times we dealt with every verse of every chapter of all 66 books. This time I said I was willing to start again, but I would ask you if you would give me the privilege of editing to help you know the most important parts of the Bible. So I'm reading again every verse of every chapter myself, but I'm trying to edit down to the parts that I think will be most helpful for you. And that's our plan. We will not do all 150 Psalms this time. We will do the best of the Psalms. And if you're willing to trust me on what the best ones are, we will not deal with all those long books of prophecy, every verse of every chapter, but the highlights of those books as we move along. So that's the plan. Let's pray. God, we believe this is your book, that you found people through whom you could work, that you did not make them perfect, that you did not tell them all things about all disciplines, that your focus with them was writing down things forever true about you, about what you require of us, that if we do what you tell us, how much better the world and all of its people will do together. So we ask you to help us find those things that are forever true, and we pray it in Christ's holy name. Amen. Did you see the article in our United Methodist Reporter this week by Adam Hamilton about creation and evolution? Did you read that? Okay, I may use it in a sermon later. I've clipped it out. Adam Hamilton now pastors the largest Methodist church in America. It's in Kansas City. First Methodist Houston was the largest for many years. But Adam Hamilton is an amazing fellow. He grew up as a boy not going to church anywhere. His family didn't go to church. Divorced parents and simply was not taken to church. It was in his teen years that a friend asked him to go to a church where they could play basketball and enjoy the youth center there. And he ended up going to church and feeling God's claim on his life. Was baptized, joined that church. A friend led him to Oral Roberts University, and he came here to Tulsa and was graduated at Oral Roberts University. But his story is that he felt at that point he had heard one side of the story, if you will. He had heard one side of the story. And it wasn't always meeting his needs. It wasn't always answering his questions. So he started inquiring about the other side of God's story and felt led to our Perkins School of Theology, Southern Methodist University in Dallas. And he went there and was graduated. And when he was graduated, went home to Kansas and was appointed pastor of an open piece of land just out in the middle of nowhere from Kansas City, out beyond the residences at that time. And what he's done there is absolutely amazing. It's called the Church of the Resurrection. Because it's a relatively new church, Adam's in his 40s now, because it's a relatively new church, and it's Adam's church, he feels free to say pretty much whatever he thinks is right, and he takes on issues that might be harder to deal with in some congregations that have been around 100 years or so. But one of his books, he's become very prolific. The Methodist Church wants him to write some more, because he's become that popular across the country. But this week in our United Methodist Reporter, one of the chapters of his new book was there, and it was about where Christians stand on creation and what God was doing. And I immediately could tell He wrote this article out of his Perkins background. He wrote this out of what he had learned at Perkins School of Theology. And what he said was, the creation stories, plural, the creation stories in the Bible are not attempts to tell you how God created, but the fact that He did. Okay? Which is right. That's the way you and I believe. And he went on to be more specific. Those who try to add up all the ages mentioned in the Hebrew Scriptures, as Bishop Ussher did, and come out with creation occurring about 3,600 years before the Common Era, or about 5,600 years ago, simply wrong. That's not what the Bible was designed to do, and it's an improper use of Holy Scripture. That the affirmation of the Bible is not about how God created the universe, but the fact that He did. How many times have you heard me say that? In our great universities, and if you saw the newest U.S. News and World Report, rendering of the top universities in this country, in their opinion, the Methodist Church had 9 of its universities in the top 55. Some people don't know that some of those are ours, like the University of Syracuse. That's one of our Methodist universities. Boston University. Boston College is Catholic. Boston University is Methodist. Of course, Duke is always right up there. Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. Emory University, Southern Methodist University in Dallas, they were there. And what I say is that we have academic freedom on our campuses. You would be surprised how many Jewish students we have at Duke and Candler, because their parents have learned that we do have academic freedom on United Methodist University campuses. In fact, the last time I saw a breakdown of all the students at SMU in Dallas, you know what the biggest religious group was? Roman Catholic. The biggest single religious body we had at SMU at that point was Roman Catholic, not Methodist. But that's beside this point. The point is, on one part of the campus, we have astronomers. On another part of the campus, we have the theology school. And the professors at the theology school are not trying to run the department of astronomy. The more they can find out about how the universe came to be, fine. Down in the quadrangle where the School of Theology is, our affirmation at chapel that week will be, so that's how God did it. You understand? They're two different disciplines. And I was so proud of Adam. He did that really well. Really, really well. In his article, he talked about Galileo and how the church, ostracized him, excommunicated him, because he dared to say that the sun doesn't go around the earth every 24 hours. Galileo said the sun doesn't go around the earth every 24 hours. That's not why we have daylight and dark. In fact, the earth is spinning on its axis. And the Catholic Church said, you're out. No more communion for you. You're out. And we have people today, often on school boards, and in big states like Texas, where they've allowed very conservative people to end up on their textbook selection committee. They're making those kinds of mistakes of trying to make the Bible a book it was never designed to be, never intended to be. And if these people would ever sit down for 30 minutes with a rabbi, they could explain that to them. But they don't, of course. All right, let's go on. Sorry I got into all that. But I want you to be proud, or pleased at least, about what's taught in your church and how we teach it and how we understand this book to have come to be. All right. There are 3 important dates that I don't mean there's going to be a quiz or anything, but you can hang what we're doing right now on these 3 dates. 1,000. That's an easy number. 1,000 before the Common Era. King David. The Jews are agreed with that. History agrees with that. Jerusalem celebrated its 3,000th anniversary 10 years ago. So this is the first thing. When we start in the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, it moved right on into 1st and 2nd Kings. This is when it began. Now, there was a king before him, of course, Saul. You all remember that. There was a king, Saul. He didn't do well, didn't last very long. This is the one to whom they point. All right. Now, today, I'm prefacing what I'm about to do today because we're going to skip over a lot of these kings. I just want to give you enough for you to see that things didn't get better. They got worse and worse and worse. After King David, of course, Solomon reigned. David able to pull all 12 tribes together. Solomon able to maintain that union. But after Solomon, Rehoboam wasn't able to do that, and they split again, north and south. North was called Israel, south Judah. Okay, remember? 10 northern Israel, south Judah. All right. Things got worse and worse and worse, and finally in 722 and 721, it carried over another year. Began in 722, the Assyrians had amassed a tremendous empire immediately north. So it's where modern-day Syria is, but it was bigger than modern-day nation of Syria. It also included a part of what is modern-day Babylon. What was Babylon in biblical time, modern-day Iraq. So part of Lebanon, today's Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq in this big Assyrian mass. And they marched south on the 10 northern tribes. And we'll see also how they attempted at one point to take the southern tribes of Judah as well. But the northern tribes, and we'll read just enough of that for you to see what happened, how the people were displaced, the Jews. They were forced marched out, and others were put in behind them in their place. And it was a great mix of blood and culture and so on. We'll show you what that was all about. That's a key date. Again, I remind you that at Caesarea, that's where Pontius Pilate lived in Jesus' time. Caesarea, over on the Mediterranean. It was an archaeological team from Southern Methodist University that was doing extensive digging, of course with government approval and everything, and with Israeli archaeologists involved as well. But the lead was from Southern Methodist University. They were digging down right near Caesarea and the big Roman aqueduct and all there. And they found this carbon dating of 722, a black level where everything was burned. And of course, that was long before Pontius Pilate, remember. We're way back in BCE, before the Common Era here. So that wasn't the case when Pontius Pilate lived there, but I'm talking about before that, 722. SMU team found that charred level that dates back right to this date. All right. When we get to the prophets section of the Bible, of the prophets, I will be saying over and over and over, he was an 8th century prophet. Right here. Most of the great prophets we have, and we usually say great prophets because they wrote longer things. We talk about minor prophets who had shorter works, but almost all of them lived in the 8th century. They were trying frantically to get the people to turn to God and live God's way. We're not successful. We had a few that made it to the 6th century. In the 6th century, the southern tribes fell as well to the Babylonians. And so now the Babylonians had redefined the boundaries, and they had sort of exploded and had taken over what was a part of the Assyrian Empire 200 years before. 150 years before. They had taken over part of the Assyrian Empire, and it predominantly was modern-day Iraq. Okay, modern-day Iraq would be the old Babylonian Empire, and the best and brightest were carted off. Now, we do have some great works that came right out of that period. And we know that Jeremiah lived in that period. We know that Ezekiel lived in that period. We know that the second portion of the scroll of Isaiah came from that period. But more of them, 8th century prophets. And I'll remind you of this when we get there, that this is where it's happening. They can see storm clouds brewing, and their kings are not responding appropriately. They're not giving the people the leadership they need. One bad king after another. And then finally it comes to the south as well here in 587. And it continued over into the next year as well. So sometimes you'll hear me say 587, 586, but that's where it happened right there. And then, of course, roughly 50 years later, about 535, the Persians. And by the way, I saw a program one night, maybe 3 weeks ago, about modern-day Iran. And you need to be aware that most modern-day Iranians do not speak Arab. Did you know that? Most of the people who live in Iran today do not speak Arab. They speak Persian, okay, the old Farsi language. They consider themselves Persians, not Arabs. Persians is what they consider themselves. In 535, Darius conquered Babylon and told the Jews they could go home. About 50 years they were in captivity. But of course, what really happened was that most of them didn't go home, and we'll get to that later. Most of them didn't go home. They'd been gone 50 years. Babylon was now home to them. And if they were doing well by this time, this was what they knew. This is what their children knew. You know, our two boys came to Oklahoma when they were young enough. Oklahoma's home to them, not Texas. Oklahoma's their home. Tulsa's their home, and it's the way they feel. So much of the writing that the Jewish rabbis now called the Talmud, commentaries on the Hebrew Scriptures, were actually produced by the people who didn't go home. And so it's called the Babylonian Talmud. All right. Okay, that's another whole thing. But these are the key dates right here as we go through this long line of kings. Okay, open your Bibles with me. I said that I show here on my notes that we left at chapter 4 of 2 Kings. Right? Chapter 4. Now again, we're not going to deal with all the stories, just some of the ones that I hope will give you the clearest picture of what was going on. Okay, we ended last week with Elisha following on the heels of Elijah everywhere he went, and Elijah saying, please, stop, stay here. And others saying to Elijah, do you know he's going to die today? Yes, be quiet. And he kept, dogging the steps of Elijah until finally Elijah said, what can I do for you? And Elisha said, I want you to grant me your spirit. He knows the old man's dying. Elijah knows he's dying. And Elisha knows God needs somebody. He feels God's calling him to be that somebody, and he is asking the old man to place the mantle. If you come to annual conference, and I know some of you have been to annual conference before, we have a beautiful service as a part of annual conference where one group of preachers are retiring and another group have just been commissioned and ordained. And that's a beautiful service, and we literally have one who is retiring taking his or her stole off and putting it around the neck of the next generation, passing on the spirit and the mantle, if you would. So that's what happened with Elisha. Elijah finally said he would bless him, and Elijah was taken up into heaven, and Elisha becomes the great man of God. So here we are in chapter 4, verse 8 is where I want us to start with a story about Elisha, the successor. One day Elisha was passing through Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived who urged him to have a meal. People took care of holy ones, didn't pay them, but they would feed them and house them. I remember when I was a boy, preachers were still often being paid at least part of their compensation. Would come by and get a couple of chickens, and get some tomatoes, come by and pick you some beans or whatever. So whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for a meal. She said to her husband, look, I'm sure that this man who regularly passes our way is a holy man of God. Let's make a small roof chamber with walls and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp so that he can stay there whenever he comes to us. Gail will remember that we were in England trying to ferret out some of the places where the Wesleys had done their preaching and teaching. And we went to a small village where we had read that there was a family who farmed there, who came to know John and Charles Wesley, admired what they were trying to do. You remember that John and Charles rode horseback more than 40,000 miles in their adult lifetime. It was estimated they rode horses 40,000 miles to teach and preach all over England, Scotland, Wales, and part of Ireland. This family decided, these crazy Wesley guys, they come through here on horseback, moving all the time. Why don't we build a little room on the end of our house with a separate lock and a separate key and give it to the Wesleys, and whenever they're passing through on horseback, even if it's after we've all gone to bed, they can unlock the door and come in and spend the night. And that's what they did. And it's still there. 300 years later, that house is still there. And they have a retired Methodist. The Methodists finally bought the place long after Methodism got to the strength it is today. We bought the house, and now a retired Methodist preacher and spouse are able to live there if they'll be host to anybody that wants to come by and see it. That's way out of the way, and so they don't get many visitors there. But it's very well kept, and the yard's mowed and the flowers are pretty. And they let you come in and say, well, this is where John and Charles would get off their horses and spend the night, eat breakfast the next morning, wash their face and hands, and take off again. So it's not unusual is what I'm saying. It's been done long years after Elisha. Now one day when he came there, he went up to the chamber and lay down there. He said to his servant Gehazi, call the Shunammite woman. When he had called her, she stood before him. He said to him, that is to his aide, say to her, since you have taken all this trouble for us, what may be done for you? Would you have a word spoken on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army? How can we repay you? In other words, she answered, I live among my own people. He said, what then may be done for her? Gehazi answered, well, she has no son, and her husband is old. Remember how important it was in biblical times for every woman to have a baby. They just felt they had not contributed if they weren't making babies. There was no overpopulation in that time, and so many children died either in childbirth or in early childhood with any number of different diseases. And women, of course, often lost their lives young also trying to birth another baby. So when a woman didn't have a baby, she really felt less than a woman. I mean, it's what society made them to feel. So this woman has not complained to Elisha about that, but finally when she's asked, can we speak to the king for you? Anything the army can do for you? We have some influence. How can we help you? Well, she's never had a baby and her husband's really old now. Think how many times that story gets told in the Bible about different couples. So he said, call her. When he, that is his aide, had called her, she stood at the door. And Elisha said, at this season, in due time, you shall embrace the son. She replied, no, my Lord, O man of God, do not deceive your servant. Now, don't get me all hoped up about that again. It isn't going to happen. Guess what? The woman conceived and bore a son at that season in due time, as Elisha had declared to her. When the child was older, he went out one day to his father among the reapers. He complained to his father, oh, my head, my head. Kid's having a terrible headache. The father said to his servant, carry him to his mother. So he carried him and brought him to his mother. The child sat on her lap until noon, and he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, closed the door on him, and left. Then she called to her husband and said, send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys so that I may quickly go to the man of God and come back again. Okay, Elisha, you said, is there anything I can do for you? There's something you can do for me. This only child of mine whom I waited for all these years has died. Verse 25. So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. Okay, remember Mount Carmel? I pointed that on the map to you last Sunday. It's right on up the coast from Caesarea. It's right near the Mediterranean Sea. A hill. It's nothing like Mount Everest or anything. It's a hill that rises up out of the plains there. It's right near the modern city of Haifa. Okay, Carmel. And it's where Elijah, Elisha's predecessor, had fought the prophets of Baal who could light a fire without a match and all that sort of thing, or flint. So when the man of God saw her coming, that is, Elisha is that man of God, he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Look, there's the Shunammite woman. Run at once to meet her. Say to her, 'Are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is the child all right?' And she answered, 'It's all right.' But when she came to the man of God at the mountain, she caught hold of his feet," which means she's prostrating herself before him. She's down at his feet. You know, she's about to beg for the most important thing ever in her life. Gehazi approached to push her away. I mean, you're not supposed to reach out and touch this holy man of God. But the man of God said, "Let her alone. She is in bitter distress. Yahweh has hidden it from me and has not told me." In other words, I don't know what's wrong with her, but I know something really bad is wrong. Then she said, "Did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, 'Do not mislead me'? I mean, I didn't beg you to help me have a son, though I've wanted one all my adult life. And I told you, don't play with my emotions here. And you saw that I did have a son, and now he's been taken away," which is worse than not having him at all, is what she's trying to say. Skip down to verse, very end of 30. "So he rose up and followed her." That is, Elisha follows her back to her house. Verse 32. "When Elisha came into the house, he saw the child lying dead on his bed. So he went in and closed the door on the two of them, on him and the boy, and prayed to Yahweh. Then he got up on the bed and lay upon the child, putting his mouth upon his mouth." All right, almost a resuscitation here. Okay, his eyes upon his eyes, his hands upon his hands, and while he lay bent over him, the flesh of the child became warm. Elisha got up, walked once to and fro into the room, got up again and bent over him. The child sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha summoned Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite woman." So he called her. When she came to him, he said, "Take your son." She came and fell at his feet. Bowing to the ground, she took her son and left. Now this story is important to you and me because Jesus does almost exactly the same thing. And in the Gospels, in Matthew's Gospel, he's trying desperately to show Jews that Jesus is greater than Moses. I mean, that trek down to Egypt when Jesus is a baby and all is to remind the Jews about Moses. That's where Moses was. That's where Moses came from after he was an adult. Came out of Egypt. Jesus is taken to Egypt and out of Egypt. He's greater than Moses. But in the Synoptic Gospels, the one that look alike, Jesus is greater than John the Baptizer. He's greater than Elijah. He's greater than Elisha. Okay, verse 42. Let's skip to 42. "A man came from Baal Shaisha." All right, the name of the town tells you much. Baal, the chief male fertility god. "Bringing food from the first fruits to the man of God, 20 loaves of barley, fresh ears of grain in his sack. Elisha said, 'Give it to the people and let them eat.' But his servant said, 'How can I set this before 100 people?' So he repeated, 'Give it to the people and let them eat, for thus says Yahweh, they shall eat and have some left.' He set it before them. They ate and had some left according to the word of the Lord." Guess what? Jesus doesn't feed 100, he feeds 5,000. And he doesn't do it with this many bushels and this many loaves. 2 loaves, 5 little fish. Okay. Jesus is greater than Elijah. Jesus is greater than Elisha. Jesus is greater than Moses. All right. Chapter 5. Everybody all right? Chapter 5. Now, when you and I grew up, we pronounced this man's name with 2 syllables. You will see in your new and better translations, it should have 3 syllables. Naaman. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram. Okay, notice something here. He's from where? Aram. And 800 years later, Jesus will speak Aramaic. Aramaic. So there was a great crossover here of cultures and language. And this person who is not a Jew, he is not a Jew, but the language of those people on the northern border of Israel at the time, that language will carry over into many of those who lived in the northern territory, which by New Testament times is called Galilee. Okay, Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master, because by him Yahweh had given victory to Aram. Okay, we know how important commanders of the army are to kings. So this is a commander of the army, like Joab was to David. He's that important. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now, once again, I just remind you that today we know about an illness that's called leprosy. But in the Bible, scholars are convinced a number of skin diseases were called by this name. A number of them. So we cannot be sure it was exactly what we would define today as leprosy. It was some kind of skin disease. It could have been psoriasis, any number of things. We don't know for sure. But a skin disease for sure. Now the Arameans, on one of their raids, had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel. They're on the northern border, and they would swoop down. And you're always trying to strengthen your gene pool. What did they always take? The women. The women and the girls. So one of these was a young girl, and she served Naaman's wife. They enslaved them. She said to her mistress, "If only my Lord," and here this is a small L, she's referring to Naaman, not God, "were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." That is, it's almost like a white flag. We're not coming to do war with you. I'm sending my commander just to meet your holy man, see if he can help him. No harm intended here. So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, which was a huge gift, 6,000 shekels of gold, a huge gift, and 10 sets of garments. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I've sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I Elohim to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy?" Just look and see how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me. You understand what the king is saying? I can't do that. I cannot cure his commander of the army. And these kings in the north had been evil. They were worshiping the gods and goddesses of fertility. So he really has no confidence in Elisha. And he thinks the king of Aram is just picking a fight with him. He sent me down here, sent all these valuable gifts. I'm supposed to get his commander healed. I can't do that. So he'll use that as a pretext for war. That's what he sees. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, which means he's undone, he's grieving, he sent a message to the king. "Why have you torn your clothes? What are you so upset about? Let him come to me, that he may learn. There is a prophet in Israel." And of course, he means a prophet of the one true God. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the entrance of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." Now stop and think about it. In matters like this, protocol is everything. I mean, as far as Naaman is concerned, Elisha is nobody. And here is the commander-in-chief, a 5-star general, if you would, who's got all these soldiers with him in chariots, bows, arrows, and spears, lined up at the house, and Elisha didn't even come out the door. He doesn't come out. He sends a servant out there. Go tell him what to do. Wash in the river. He'll be fine. Well, that wasn't the way things were usually done. But Elisha, you see, is trying to show the importance of a prophet of the one true God. I mean, Israel and Judah were supposed to be so constructed that it was God's holy people who anointed people king. The king was not above the religious leader in that sense. The religious leader was above the king in that sense. And Elisha's trying to make a statement. Naaman misinterprets. Naaman became angry and went away saying, I thought that for me he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of Yahweh, his Elohim, and would wave his hand over the spot where he's ill and cure the leprosy. And then he says, and this muddy little river we've got bigger, notice, are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? I mean, our Tigris Euphrates are bigger than these. Could I not wash in them and be clean? He turned and went away in a rage. But his servants approached and said to him, notice how they act like little children, Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? I mean, we realize this sounds silly. Why don't you try it? Why don't you go down into the Jordan River? Give it a try. We've come so far. Why don't you give it a try? How much more when all he said to you was, wash and be clean. So Naaman went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of Elohim. His flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy. We would say like a baby's rear end. He was so smooth. He was clean. Whether they're acknowledged or not, the men of God are able to call the power of God and wonderful things happen. All right. Flip over to chapter 8 with me. We're going to skip over now. Just hitting the highlights. Now, what I want you to note, just for your own information here, is that one reason 1st and 2nd Kings can be difficult is that each time a new king is introduced, either north or south, he is introduced as being into the certain year of the reign of the king in the other. And that's sort of confusing if you're not keeping it straight, because it sort of tells you the story of one king, and then he died and rested with his fathers and so on. Or not his story is told in the annals of the kings of Israel and so on. And so he's dead and buried. And then all of a sudden you shift to the north, or from the north to the south, and you're told, now when that one who's just reigned 32 years was only in his 17th year, so-and-so became king of the other. Am I making any sense? So they're trying to bring both kingdoms along at the same time, but they spend time in Israel, then they spend time in Judah, then back in Israel, then back in Judah, then back in Israel. That's the way it's. So they may tell you about somebody that reigned 51 years, and then the very next chapter they jump back up to his 27th year when somebody so-and-so became king in the other territory. So that makes it a little bit confusing for you. Let's look at chapter 8, just to give you a feel for how things are not getting better, they're getting worse. Verse 25. Chapter 8, verse 25. So in the 12th year of King Joram, son of Ahab of Israel. And just a quick reminder, Ahab was deemed the worst husband of Jezebel. The worst. So Joram became king, and we've been reading, if you'd read all of chapter 7 8, you would have learned more about Joram. I don't think he's all that important to you and me. So now we jump back into his reign to deal a little bit with Ahaziah. Ahaziah, son of King Jehoram of Judah, began to reign. So in the 12th year of the king in the north, suddenly we have a new king in the south. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. Look at verse 27. He also walked in the way of the house of Ahab, doing what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, as the house of Ahab had done, for he was son-in-law to the house of Ahab. Skip to chapter 9, verse 30. Again, I'm just picking up a few of these statements because they are repeated again and again. He was evil, he was evil, he was evil, he was evil, he was evil. And the people keep hoping the next one will be better, and the next one is not better. All right, verse 30 of chapter 9. The reason I'm lifting this up is not that Jehu is anybody that you particularly need to know, but you remember that Elijah, who's now gone to heaven, Elisha has succeeded him. Elijah had predicted that Jezebel would die and the dogs would lick her blood. So it's about to happen. Elijah's gone, but God has not forgotten Jezebel. So when Jehu came to Jezreel, remember that's the name of a river valley that flows from near Mount Carmel eastward toward the Jordan. Okay, it's still a very fertile valley, still lots of farming there. When Jehu came to Jezreel, Jezebel, the queen, heard of it. Now the king's dead. Again, her husband's been dead, but she's still living. So what does Jezebel do? She gusses herself up. She's an old woman now. She's putting Botox around her eyes. No, she painted her eyes and adorned her head and looked out of the window. As Jehu entered the gate, she said, "Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" He looked up to the window and said, "Who is on my side?" Who? 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him, and he said, Jehu, who was a powerful man at this time, said, "Throw her down." Not bring her, throw her. Throw her out of the upstairs. So they threw her down. Some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, which then trampled on her. It upset the horses, so they're stomping around. Then Jehu went in and ate and drank. He said, "See to that cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter." I mean, she's due something. But when they went to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. When they came back and told him, he said, "This is the word of Yahweh, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite." And then it's a quotation, "In the territory of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel. The corpse of Jezebel shall be like dung in the field, in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say." In other words, we don't want there to be a shrine, a grave, where somebody will come and weep. You know, like Elvis's house or something. Come and weep and pretend this was a marvelous, wonderful woman. If the dogs have eaten her, we don't have to deal with her anymore. Okay? All right. Chapter 12. Just want you to know, when God says Jezebel will meet an end appropriate for her, she did. Chapter 12. Now, the reason I'm going to mention this story is, how many of you have been into the chapel at Oral Roberts University? Have you been there? Okay. Shortly after I arrived here, my very first Sunday, Oral and Evelyn were here at church, and Dr. Roberts invited me to come and speak at the chapel and in one of their chapel services. And I said, "Sure, I'd be glad to," and I did that. When we were going into the chapel, I saw this beautiful box. And I asked him, said, "Now, what is the symbolism of this beautiful box?" And he said, and he describes what's right here, chapter 12, 2 Kings. Okay, that they were trying to raise more money for the university, and they were just, the City of Faith was coming up out of the ground, and they had this chest in which people were supposed to be able to drop their gifts without anyone but God knowing what was there until, there would be a sufficient number, and then the gifts would be taken and something good would be done. So I just want you to see, this is where, if you've ever been there, if you've seen this beautiful box, I'm assuming it's still there. I haven't been to chapel there in a long time now. But it was there, I know, during Dr. Roberts' life. Okay. In the 7th year of Jehu, so it's skipping back in one reign in order to bring you up to date on the other, Jehoash began to reign in the south, in Judah. He reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. Look at verse 2. Jehoash did what was right in the sight of Yahweh all his days, because the priest Jehoiada instructed him. See, that's what was supposed to happen. The king was always supposed to keep God's man, and they were men back in those days most of the time, to keep God's men close by, to instruct him, to help him, to be his chief advisor on what's right and what's wrong. How does a king do justice and righteousness and so on? Well, this king is better. So I want you to know, occasionally one came along who did better. Nevertheless, not everything that happened was good. The high places, these temples on the top of the hills to the gods and goddesses of fertility, were not taken away. Okay? The people continued to sacrifice and make offerings on the high places. Jehoash said to the priests, "All the money offered as sacred donations that is brought into the house of Yahweh, the money for which each person is assessed, the money from the assessment of persons, the money from the voluntary offerings brought into the house of Yahweh, let the priest receive from each of the donors, and let them repair the house." Solomon's temple is a couple hundred years old now, needs some real work done to it. Let them repair the house wherever any need of repairs is discovered. But by the 23rd year of King Jehoash, the priest had made no repairs on the house. Does that sound like the Oklahoma legislature to you? If we have a lottery for public education, then whatever money the lottery brings in means we can take this education money and put it somewhere else. That sort of thing. So the box was for one thing, the gifts, but they're not being used for the purpose for which the people gave the money. Did you know that legally you can't do that in the Methodist Church? If I tell you that we're receiving money for a certain item, if it's Circle of Care Ministries, and you give money to that, I cannot say, well, I think prison ministry needs it more now. Cannot happen. If you give money to one cause that was represented as that cause, the money has to go to that cause. That's a rule in our denomination. Okay, look at verse 9. Then the priest Jehoiada, this has been the conscience of this king. He's been influential there. So since the money is not being used for the purpose for which it's given, he comes up with this idea of the box, the chest. And Oral Roberts liked this story, and he used it. Okay, verse 9. Then the priest Jehoiada took a chest, made a hole in its lid, you and I would say a slit of some sort, and set it beside the altar on the right side as one entered the house of Yahweh. The priest who guarded the threshold put in it all the money that was brought into the house of Yahweh. Whenever they saw that there was a great deal of money in the chest, the king's secretary and the high priest went up, counted the money that was found in the house of Yahweh, and tied it up in bags. They would give the money that was weighed out into the hands of the workers who had the oversight of the house of Yahweh. Then they paid it out to the carpenters and the builders who worked on the house of Yahweh, to the masons and the stone cutters, as well as to buy timber and quarried stone for making repairs on the house of Yahweh, as well as for any outlay for repairs of the house. Okay. So a beautiful box, people could put in their offerings, and they had 2 people there watching. Not 1 pair of eyes, 2 pairs of eyes. You know what happens at Boston Avenue? Every Monday morning, along with our financial secretary, when the offerings from the day before are opened, there is a layperson there, and they count together. And each verifies the figures of the other. Frank has done this for many, many years. We've had other lay people do it in the past. So, 2 people, not 1. 2 people, both of whom sign their names to the deposit slip. This is what was given yesterday. This is what was deposited on Monday. Okay? Other Methodist churches I've been a part of have done the same. Once I've been at big ones. Monies are taken to the Nat Depository in locked bags. The bank is not to open them. The next morning, pick them up, bring them, and count them. 2 pairs of eyes. 1 can be a staff person. 1 must be a lay person in the church, not staff. Okay? So we try really hard. When I say in the Methodist Church, we count every dollar and we account for every dollar. I'm very serious about that. Okay, let's go on. Chapter 13. Just thought you might want to know if you've ever seen that beautiful box. Anybody know if the box is still there in the chapel at Oral Roberts? I'm not sure. Okay. By the way, First Methodist, after Dr. Buskirk became pastor, he thought that had worked well at Oral Roberts, and I know for a time they had a Jehoiada chest over at First Methodist as well to do some work on their building. Okay, let's go to chapter 13. So Jehu was the king up in the north who said to the eunuchs, throw out the window. And they did. Well, he finally died too, Jehu as well, of course. So Jehoahaz, this is in the latter part of verse 1, chapter 13, son of Jehu, began to reign over Israel in Samaria. He reigned 17 years. And guess what? He did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. Skip to the latter part of verse 2. He did not depart from them, that is the way others before him had done. So the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Israel, so he gave them repeatedly into the hand of King Hazael of Aram. All right, so notice here, Aram, I've told you, was right on the northern border of the northern tribes. Very much where Lebanon is today, Lebanon and Syria. And they had various raids across the border, as when they took the young girl, who would later say, if the commander-in-chief of the army could only go to the holy man of Israel, he could be healed. Okay, so they had these continuing border raids, coming farther and farther into the south. And God's letting this happen because the people are evil. Didn't say God makes it, but He allows. All right. Then into the hand of Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael. Kings of Aram come and go, but they just keep raiding the northern tribes. But Jehoahaz entreated Yahweh and prayed to him, begged him. And Yahweh heeded him, for he saw the oppression of Israel, how the king of Aram oppressed them. God grieves over His children. They're sheep without a shepherd. They don't have a good shepherd. Therefore, Yahweh gave Israel a Savior so that they escaped from the hand of the Arameans, and the people of Israel lived in their homes as formerly. Things settled down for a while. Nevertheless, they did not depart from the sins of the house of Jeroboam, which he called Israel to sin, but continued to walk in the old ways. The sacred pole, symbol of the male sex organ, these gods and goddesses of fertility, also remained in Samaria. So even when God gives them a temporary truce, a peace, they don't do any better. Skip to verse 14. Now when Elisha had fallen sick with the illness of which he was to die. Okay. So now it's Elisha's turn. Everybody dies, good folks and bad. King Joash of the northern tribes of Israel went down to him and wept before him, crying, my father, my father. Now, it doesn't, of course, mean literally my father. It was a term of endearment and affection here. Spiritual father, if you would, in the way that we still use that title in Roman Catholic Church and Episcopal churches and some others. Verse 20, nonetheless, even though the king comes and cries and weeps about the sickness, verse 20 says, so Elijah died, and they buried him. Skip to verse 22. Now King Hazael of Aram oppressed Israel all the days of Jehoahaz. That is, God gave them a reprieve, but they didn't do any better, so the raids pick up again. But Yahweh was gracious to them and had compassion on them. He turned toward them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and would not destroy them, nor has he banished them from his presence until now. So 2 Kings is being written some long time later, and God still hasn't given up on them, is the message here. Go to chapter 14. In the second year of King Joash, son of Joahaz of Israel, okay, so sort of pegging things for you in the northern kingdom, but he really wants to talk about a new king down in Judah. King Amaziah, son of Joash of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he began to reign. Look at verse 3. He did what was right in the sight of Yahweh. Now, what are you picking up on? The southern kings are not always getting it right, but more of them are trying than in the north. And so the north will fall 150 years before the south falls. So the southern kings are doing a little better, but not completely better. Look at verse 4. But the high places were still not removed. The people still sacrificed and made offerings on the high places. As soon as the royal power was firmly in his hand, this new king, he killed his servants who had murdered his father. I mean, does it sound like a good dynasty here? It's horrible. These are the sons and grandsons and great-grandsons of David, and one is just about as bad as the one before him. Skip to verse 11. Latter part. So King Jehoash of Israel went up. He and King Amaziah of Judah faced one another in battle at Beth-Shemesh, which belongs to Judah. So it's not enough that the Arameans are raiding them regularly from the north. Why not the 10 northern ones fight the 2 southern ones? Why not? So they go to battle with each other. Judah was defeated by Israel. Everyone fled home. King Jehoash of Israel, that's the north, captured King Amaziah of Judah. So he came to Jerusalem and broke down the wall of Jerusalem from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate, a distance of 400 cubits. Cubit, remember, is the distance from the elbow to the tip of the longest finger, about 18 inches. So we're looking at 600 feet, or about 200 football fields. That was huge. A gap in the wall of 2 football fields, the wall around the holy city. He seized all the gold and silver and all the vessels that were found in the house of Yahweh and in the treasuries of the king's house, as well as hostages, and he took it all back to Samaria. So the king of the north finally, he desecrates the holy place in Jerusalem and takes it back to his own place. Look at verse 23. King Jeroboam, son of Joash of Israel, began to reign in Samaria. He reigned 41 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Are you getting the pattern? All right. You'll see then that God has every reason finally to throw up his hands and let the enemy come and take them. I'm going to mark chapter 15. And that will be September the 5th. September 5, we will start right there. All right, if you haven't been to church, don't rush off. I'll be right back.